Hello, thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings Podcast. I'm your host, Paul. Today is Tuesday, June 17th, 2025, and this is episode 43. It's crazy to think we've had 43 episodes since December. We've been getting it. It's been fun. It's been a lot of. I've had some really cool experiences on here. I've been able to talk to some of my heroes. I've been able to meet a lot of real cool people. I share with a lot of people. One of my favorite things about this has been I will have some of my favorite people that some of my heroes in AA, if there is such a thing. I have heroes that will get on the podcast and we'll start talking about the same subject. And every one of them will have like a similar, but some of them complete opposite experience with all of it. And the cool part about it is it's been opening me up to the fact that like we all have the freedom to have our own experience. There is no, wrong way or perfect way of doing any of this stuff, especially with working the steps or any of that. And it's just opened me up to just all kinds of new journeys. And I want to thank everyone that's been tuning in and listening. We've had a lot of good support. You can email us at recoveryrecordings615@yahoo.com. Also, we have a private Facebook page. Look us up. It's 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings Podcast on Facebook. You also find us on Audible, Spotify, iHeartRadio, several other major platforms. Super excited about tonight's guest and tonight's content. Actually, the topic me and David have been talking about doing this for a minute, and then I'm getting to meet for the first time Jimmy. So tonight we got David G and Jimmy D from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. How you guys doing?
Pretty good, man. How are you?
Doing good, man. Doing good. For the listeners, me and David have been knowing each other for several years now. We met in meetings several years back in Murfreesboro, and we just kind of kicked it off. David and me had we started playing some music together. We did some recordings together, and we've just stayed in touch over the years. How's y'all's week been?
Man, mine's been good. It's been a little crazy. The AC's been out in my car for a while. I just got my car back this morning. My wife and my kids and we went to a park and swam in a river, and we saved a sunfish that was on the shore. It was gasping for air. Oh wow! And, yeah. And we took a couple of pictures with the fish before saving it, but the fish is okay. So.
Nice. How was y'all's Father's Day?
It was pretty good for a guy that doesn't have kids.
Yeah.
It's good. I don't want kids. I have fur babies, but it was pretty good. I got to pull up a picture of my dad, and he had me when he was really young. He was 16 when him and my mom had me. Yeah. So I pulled up this picture of him at like 18, me at 2, and posted it for Father's Day, and got a lot of compliments on that, and that was really cool.
Nice.
Really cool to be able to have that relationship with my dad again, because that was, it wasn't always like that when I was out there running and gunning. So it's actually pretty good for me, man.
Nice.
David, you have kids. How was yours?
Yeah, mine was great, man. My wife made me feel like a king. Yeah, she, the big book says that we have a tendency to find I can't quote it exactly, but we get the best women, and it's been my experience that is true. So Yeah, no complaints on my end.
Nice. Share with everybody. David, we'll start with you. David, what's your sobriety date, just for the listeners?
My sobriety date is November the 15th of 2019.
2019. Okay, cool. How about you, Jimmy?
Mine is April 23rd, 2018.
2018. Nice. Very cool. For the listeners, this is me and David have talked over the last few months just about doing some podcast stuff, and what keeps coming to mind is Emmet Fox, and we're all big fans of Emmet Fox, and we're going to do this episode just on the spirituality of Emmet, and I guess I'll kind of jump it off with, for me, when I first, my sobriety date's 12/17/2016. In that first year or so of sobriety, I went on, obviously a spiritual journey, and I started getting into all kinds of different books, all kinds of different teachings. At the time, my relationship with Christianity was, pretty foul. I didn't believe any of it, pretty much, and I had a whole lot of resentments towards it or whatever. And then over that first year or so and again, just a little disclaimer for the listeners, we're members of people in recovery, and we're not speaking for any 12-step programs like the disclaimer was saying. We're just guys in recovery sharing our experience with certain spiritual literature that's kind of shaped our experiences over the years. So just to put that out there. To go back, for my first year or so of sobriety, I had heard, I started getting into the first thing I had was the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount was a game changer for me. Like, finally, for the first time in years, actually, I think probably my whole life, where I could hear someone talk about some of the Christianity, pull Bible stuff out of the Bible, to where it was like, for the first time I could understand, I could relate to it. I felt like what this guy was talking was my experience, even though it was weird because it was a truth I didn't know I had, but yet it was there, right? And it started explaining stuff, and it was like, oh, wow, I started having this aha moments. And that was my first relationship with Emmet Fox. And then it turned into, branched out into some of the other stuff, the Golden Key. I had a sponsor at one point in my recovery. The Golden Key was real big for him. And it still is today. Actually, I share that with the sponsees all the time. And the Emmet Fox, the Sermon on the Mount, all of it. So it was cool because I started, I started finding different freedoms just through that body of work that I was finding in Emmet's work, and it was a game changer for me, and it just kind of branched out from there to other books and all that. And so I wanted to briefly touch on some of that. How about you? How about you guys?
You want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. So when I grew up in North Alabama, and luckily, like I said, my dad was very young, and he ended up raising me. So he had to grow up fast, and he did not raise me religiously. He's not a religious person. Like, if anything, he's probably more Buddhist leaning, agnostic than anything. But I wasn't raised religious. But when I was a teenager, I started playing music, and in order for me to join this band, I had to get saved and go to their church. And it was something I never really truly believed in. I believe that there was more to life than what we saw, but I just didn't really get down with what I was being fed by my peers at school. And, when I got sober in 2018, my alcoholism had, I don't want to sound cliche, it beat me into a place of willingness to where I was actually willing to try, Christianity. My first sponsor was a priest in the rooms. He was in the rooms. And, we worked together for 2 years, and I read the Bible a lot during that, and there were some things that I liked in it, and then there was a lot of things that I didn't really like in it at all. Because I was reading it literally like a history book, and I know. So I also I'm a veteran, and I've got injuries that I sometimes struggle with if I think about them too much or don't do the right thing physically. And I was in a lot of pain at that point in time, physical pain. And, my old sponsor had told me, You should claim your healing. And I'm like, what kind of Mickey Mouse BS is that? And I said those words, but I tried it. And, I didn't know anything about Emmett Fox, and neither did he. But it was working. And I'm like, holy crap, something's on here, but I can't really get down with a dogma, because I didn't get down with the heaven and hell concept. I'm a reincarnation guy myself.
Yeah.
We ended up parting ways, not because of that. He decided that he was wanting to go to the church, and I did not want to follow him. I liked my 12-step recovery. So I started working with a new sponsor, and I told him, about, him telling me, hey, claim it. And, my pain actually started going away, when I would do stuff like that. And I thought it was crazy. And then, he said, yeah, you should get around the year with Emmet Fox.
Nice. And
I did. And, I started liking what I saw. It kind of broke the idea of a vengeful, what I grew up with, that fire and brimstone, vengeful fella in the sky that was going to smite me for listening to Metallica.
Yeah.
And it gave me something that I realized that, I kind of sort of believed all along, but it really hit on it really well, that it's something, that God is something within all of us, and it's all around, and it's the only presence, and that God is good. And, we're all part of that. And, reading that book around the year is where I started. And then 6 months into reading that, we read Sermon on the Mount together. And that really opened my eyes, especially to I always thought Jesus was pretty cool. Going to church, I'm like, that is the one cool thing I heard. This cat was cool. I really admire this fella.
Nice.
The other characters in the Bible, maybe not so much, but that was my experience. And, I like Sermon on the Mount. It dissected Jesus's teachings to where I could access it and understand it. And there was no dogma. It's like, I can apply this to my everyday life.
Yeah.
And it opened up my eyes, like, what I do and what I think and how I act and how I speak does create what I see on the outside world. And it kind of goes back to that fourth column on the fourth step. Where was I to blame? What was my part in it? And that made so much sense to me. I'm like, man, it's all kind of coming together. And, 5 years later, me and my sponsor still meet once a week over FaceTime and read an Emmet Fox book together.
Nice.
Right now we're on Alter Your Life. Of course, that also got me into other new thought philosophies. Like, big fan of Neville Goddard, but this is an Emmet Fox conversation. But yeah, it definitely got me wanting to seek more and practice more.
Yeah.
And it's helped me out a ton, man.
Yeah, that's cool. So what are y'all, what'd you say, what book are y'all into right now?
It's called Alter Your Life.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. How about, I really like how you just touched on, there wasn't the dogmatic side of his teachings, it was not there. It was more like principles that you could relate to, that you could, have a daily application. That was my experience with it too. I tend to get kind of turned off when it comes to a lot of the dogmatic stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I can relate to that. And, David?
Well, I like everything that's been said so far. So I got into Emmet Fox about 1.5 years ago. I was a little bit later to the party than you guys were. I grew up in a pretty religious environment. I went to a Christian school for a long time while going to a church that was a Christian church. And I won't speak on denominational affiliation or anything like that, but early on, I was observant enough to realize that they were telling me things that were somewhat contradictory to one another. So, at school, I was being fed one set of beliefs and one set of requirements. And at church, I was given another set of beliefs and another set of requirements. And they were similar, but just different enough to make me scratch my head. And, as a teenager, I became a little bit more rebellious. And, so I went through a long period of time where, whether I consciously believed or not, I was always psychologically Christian, and that was a serious problem for me, at different periods of time, because when I didn't believe, it was kind of torturous trying to reconcile what was going on consciously with what was going on unconsciously, and when I got sober several years later, I kind of borrowed somebody else's concept of God. And for 2 or 3 years, that worked really well for me. My religion was very, very separate from my recovery. I would say I believed a certain set of things, and I would practice a certain set of recovery principles, but I kept those things completely separate. And, one day that stopped working for me. It seems to me that at different points in our sobriety, our concept of God is supposed to evolve. It's supposed to change. And sometimes that's incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I went out I set out on a course of vigorous action, and I started studying what all of these different denominations taught. So I learned everything about Catholics, and well, not everything, but I learned a lot about Catholicism. I learned a lot about Eastern Orthodoxy. I learned a lot about Anglicanism and Presbyterianism and all of these isms, right? And, at the end of the day, the damning thing about it all was that they're all right, and that it produced more confusion than harmony for me. And at just the right time in my confusion, I met this cat who's sitting in the room with me, Jimmy, and he talked to me about Sermon on the Mount a little bit. And since I've come into recovery, I've been a seeker. I want to read all the books. I want to know the stuff. I want to continue to grow in understanding and effectiveness.
Yeah.
And I remember, reading Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, and very, very briefly, Emmet Fox's Sermon on the Mount is mentioned, right? But it's not covered in a lot of places in our literature. There's a little bit more about the Oxford group, but Emmet Fox is kind of one of AA's unsung heroes. And I ordered a copy of Sermon on the Mount, and I started reading it, and I would be really, really on board, and then something would jump at me to take me off, and I would put the book down for a little bit.
Yeah.
But I couldn't put it down forever. I kept reading. I kept trying to reconcile what I thought I knew with what was being said to me. And, I really appreciate how Jimmy talked about the practical aspects. My previous religious convictions, while, they sometimes gave me peace of mind and sometimes they didn't deliver in the practical aspect the same way as Emmet Fox's explanation of Scripture did for me.
Yeah.
The Sermon on the Mount was a jumping off place for me, but I've read not everything that Emmet Fox has written, but a whole lot of it. And I've gone through periods of time where he takes me off and then I pick it back up. He's a bit of a challenging read, especially if you come into it with some preconceived notions.
Yeah.
But over time, the more I set those preconceived notions aside and I develop a relationship with this literature and a relationship with the practices in it, like the Golden Key and other things that I'm sure we'll talk about later, like it really delivers the goods. And it was fascinating to me that the early AA fellowship was reading this stuff before the big book came around. And, there's all kinds of stuff in here that you don't really hear talked about a whole lot in Alcoholics Anonymous that's perfectly compatible with it.
Yeah.
It's perfectly compatible with it if you know where to look.
Yeah.
But my experience with Emmet Fox has been a pretty groovy one, man. Because today I've been able to shed a lot of my preconceived notions, and my concept of God has shifted a lot. It's the same God, but also not the same God at the same time.
Yeah.
Emmet Fox helped open that door for me. So, If he can hear us now, thanks, buddy.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, we can.
You had touched on. You said that. Did they actually quote it by name in Dr. Bob, the old timers? Is it? Do they actually say it, or is it just? Does it kind of paraphrase?
I'm pretty sure it's quoted. It's talking about when Dr. Bob and Sister Ignatia were treating people at. I think it was St. Thomas in Akron. Don't quote me on that if I'm wrong.
I got you.
Do quote me on that if I'm right. But yeah, he would give them a copy of Emmet Fox's Sermon on the Mount and Henry Drummond's The Greatest Thing in the World. Those two things were just about mandatory reading for the people who would go through treatment there. So, Dr. Bob really believed in this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Nice, interesting. And I'm sure we're going to have some history buffs that know way more about any of this than me, for sure, that will probably comment on any of this stuff. And so let's go into some of those. Let's go back into some of that early day stuff. Didn't you mention you wanted to talk on some of that?
Yeah. So again, like you said, Paul, this is not an endorsement. The words Jesus and Christ might come up every once in a while. This is not an endorsement of, Jimmy just showed me something. It's Dr. Bob and the Good Old Timers, pages 310 through 311. But okay. There's, in the earliest days, there were pretty much two home bases in AA. There was Akron and New York. And both Akron and New York were getting exposure to this stuff. There was a gentleman in the New York group named Al. I don't know what his last initial was. His mother was Emmet Fox's secretary.
Nice.
And so after the New York meetings, they would oftentimes go and hear Emmet Fox talk at, I can't remember what the venue was. I don't remember if it was Carnegie Hall or it was Carnegie Hall. And so if you look in our literature, a lot of the New York crowd was really skeptical toward religious matters. They didn't want religious stuff going in the big book. But Emmet Fox was apparently palatable to them because they would go and listen to him lecture. And he would break this spirituality down into a practical, psychological approach to life. Meanwhile, in Akron, everybody who was getting treatment was reading this stuff too. This stuff is thoroughly ingrained in the lifeblood of the fellowship. You just don't hear it talked about a lot in meetings, and his philosophy is also sometimes a little bit overshadowed. Our other major influence was the Oxford group, and the Oxford group was really big on surrender to the will of God for the benefit of the group. And you hear a lot about that in Alcoholics Anonymous. Emmet Fox's philosophy is very much how your self is empowered after this surrender occurs. And, that's the stuff that's been really valuable for me. Jimmy was talking about claiming it, right?
Right.
The big book says we claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection.
Yeah.
And, Emmet Fox is all about claiming it. It's okay to claim that spiritual progress because, we're all supposed to be an example to the alcoholic who still suffers. And, Emmet Fox has taught me that it's okay to claim it. It's okay to have a decent opinion of yourself because we're all made in the image of our Creator. We're walking embodiments of that. And it's okay to look at that as a good thing.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. Jimmy, talk to us, buddy.
Yeah, I'm just sitting through here, and it's funny because I was a huge self-deprecator, man. And even in early sobriety, I had a bad habit of just, I would go to painful lengths to deprecate myself because I thought that's what true humility was, And I did get corrected by a couple of the old timers, and my first sponsor did get on to me for it. He's like, you got to speak life into yourself. I'm like, well, that seems contradictory to what I hear in contemporary AA meetings. And I'm not throwing shade. That's just my experience.
Yeah.
And it's funny because he was a Pentecostal pastor telling me these things. Now later on, when I started working with who I'm working with now, who got me into Emmet Fox, it was always like my biggest problem is low self-worth and negative self-talk.
Yeah.
And I said, how in the world do I remain humble while being positive about myself? And then like getting deeper into the Emmet Fox specifically, and this doesn't go back to the early days. I'm a history buff, but not nearly as well spoken as David. So I do want to read something here if you're cool with that. But Absolutely. It kind of like made me realize that I'm a lot more than what I think I am, and human beings in general are a lot more than what they think they are. And I'm going to read something from around the year with Emmet Fox. And this is a daily devotional. It's from January 16th, but this is where it talks about the 7 main aspects of God. So January 16th, God is soul with a capital S. The 5th main aspect of God is soul. Soul is that aspect of God by virtue of which he is able to individualize himself. The word individual means undivided. Most people seem to think it suggests separateness, but actually individual means undivided, and God has the power of individualizing himself without, so to speak, breaking himself into parts. You were really an individualization of God. Only God can individualize himself in an infinite number of units of consciousness, and yet not be in any way separate because God is spirit. Matter cannot be individualized. It can only be divided. So your real self, the Christ within, the spiritual man, the I am, or the divine spark, as it is variously called, is an individualization of God. You are the presence of God at the point where you are. Man may very well be compared to an electric light bulb. The electric current is present in all parts of the circuit, but it shines forth. Or one might say, figuratively, become self-conscious in the bulb. So divine mind, and mind is capitalized in this sentence, becomes self-conscious in you. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods? John 10:34. When you are called upon to perform some task or undertake some responsibility that seems too great for you, realize that you are one with God, and the task will become our business instead of my business. And that's where the reading ends. So
nice.
I learned, if I'm talking bad about myself, I'm talking bad about God. If I'm going out and saying I'm a miserable sinner, dirty sinner, I'm a sick man, I'm flawed, and I'm doomed to fail, I'm taking God's name in vain.
Oh.
Even deeper, and I still wrestle with this, and I still fall short of this, because I forget. When I talk bad about another human being, I'm talking bad about God too. So that's where the stuff like that really reaches out and grabs me. And one day I will remember it and practice it perfectly. Maybe not in this specific lifetime, in my next one, but it's all about progress.
Claim it.
Got to claim it, and I can't say that I'll never be able to, and I've got to, mentally claim it and work towards that, and embody that and express God perfectly.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I like it. Again, like what keeps popping up in my mind is him working through us, right? I'll never forget. I heard Don P talk. I was probably 5 years sober or something. I heard Don say, he was like, "It's not about making a good demonstration for God. It's about allowing God to demonstrate through me what He can do." And I was just like, "Wow!" Like at that particular time in my life, I really needed to hear that, and that's what it's about today. It's like, what would God have me be? What's blocking that from taking place? And I really like how you just talked about how the self-talk, right? The negative self-talk and stuff, man, that was just my norm. And to be honest with you, until I had gotten to, had been meditating to where I had some awareness that was going on inside of me. Also, before I even had the awareness that was going on inside by myself, my conversations with my first sponsor was huge on, like, I would share with him enough of my life to where I started seeing how, like, man, I am freaking beating myself up constantly, judging every situation outside of me, right, wrong, good and bad, right, wrong, good and bad, right, wrong, good and bad. And that life is exhausting, right? You know, and he used to ask me, and it's funny because I never realized this was even possible. He said, Paul, if I get to choose to look at life however I choose to look at it, why wouldn't I choose to look at it from a more productive point of view versus something that's destructive for my life? You know, and I didn't realize at that particular time when he would say that to me, it's my first year of sobriety, you know, and I was like, what do you mean choose how I get to look at it? I didn't realize I was, you know, unconsciously walking through life, you know, beating myself up with my inner thought life, right? And
Sure.
you know, and so let's talk a little bit about that. What y'all's experience with some of that and the teachings?
Well, so I want to say something. You know, when for a while, you know how we all have one-liners we use in the rooms and such. You know, and I learned this from watching somebody. People would ask how I was doing, and I would say, "Oh, better than I deserve." Right? You know, well, if God is perfect justice and perfect mercy, you know, then what I deserve is wherever I'm at. And, you know, I don't have to beat myself up for the sins of the past anymore. You know, you were talking about how God works through us, and I found there's a connection. There's a lot of connections between the Big Book and Sermon on the Mount, but I want to read from both books and see if you can even tell where one leaves off and the other begins, because this kind of touches on that. Let's see. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. Having shown that God and man are parent and child, he goes on to delineate the function of each in the grand scheme of things. He explains that it is the nature of God to be in heaven and of man to be on earth, because God is cause and man is manifestation. Cause cannot be expression, and expression cannot be cause, and we must be careful not to confuse the two things. Here, heaven stands for God or cause, because in religious phraseology, heaven is the term for the presence of God. In metaphysics, it is called absolute, because it is the realm of pure, unconditioned being, of archetypal ideas. The word earth means manifestation, and man's function is to manifest or express God or cause. So, you know, in a 12-step context, you know, there's a lot of directions you can go with that, you know. You know, he is the principal, we are the personalities. You know, it's powerful stuff, and it's empowering and humbling at the same time, you know. Jimmy looks like he wants to say something here.
Oh, I mean, sure. Finish what you're saying. So mine's not going to be nearly as eloquent and beautiful as that. So I will share, and I always tell David, me and David have some pretty deep conversations when we link up, man.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're crazy, and then a black cat walks around with a Doritos bag with his head on and interrupts a conversation. That is a true story.
That's funny.
But one thing that I noticed is, like, you know, initial hang up I had in Sermon on the Mount, you know, it was a lot of the your thought and your speaking creates your reality. That was something that I believed as a kid and had parted ways with as an adult. Well, really as a teenager, and especially as I got deeper into my disease. But when I first started getting into this and noticing it and actually practicing it, I started becoming more aware of things. You know, if I talked about how I hurt all the time, I hurt a lot worse. If I said I feel good, I felt a lot better. And I've used that successful many times, and I've forgotten that successfully many times. And I got the results that I thought. And I've also had some pretty crazy experiences, like when I first started thinking, you know, I was an angry dude, man. I really was.
Yeah.
I had a chip on my shoulder. Even at 2 years sober, I still had a chip on my shoulder. 7 years sober, I'm still a little rough around the edges sometimes, but I'm better than what I was. Me and my sponsor we had gone out to eat, and there was the restaurant we'd gone to it only had one bathroom, and it was a single toilet bathroom, and it had a bar in it. And I knocked on the door, and I guess this dude was just fed up that day. And he said something smart. And I said, I hope I'm bigger than this dude. I'm going to bow up on him and scare the crap out of him when he comes out. Because I'm not a small guy either. I'm 6 foot, 220 pounds. And the dude that walks out of the bathroom was bigger and scarier than me. Mm. And it's funny how I was thinking negatively. And I wasn't thinking in love. I was thinking in fear. And I believe, this may sound hokey, that was that manifestation, of my own anger and fear and misery. That was my manifestation showing up to be like, all right, you asked for it.
Yeah.
Luckily, he didn't whoop me.
Yeah.
We just kind of stared each other down, and I went to the bathroom, and he went about his day. Mm. Now, I've had other good things. There was a gentleman at my current home group that I did not particularly get along with when I first moved here. And I golden keyed him,
Yeah.
That sounds kind of weird without the context.
Yeah. Can you explain what the golden key is for somebody who...
So for those that don't know, the golden key is when you stop thinking about your difficulty and think about God instead. So, and I thought that was kind of hokey too, because I'm like, well, the difficulty is going to be there, but it's really approaching the matter from what Emmet Fox refers to as scientific prayer.
Yeah.
I have to see the presence of God where the difficulty is. Mm. So this individual, I saw a lot of anger and fear and hatred in, and I started scientifically praying for him using the golden key and envisioning him as a loving person filled with love and happy. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, this guy's one of the happiest sons of bitches I ever met. No joke.
Nice.
Mark my language.
Nice.
He's an absolute pleasure to be around. Everybody remarks on it. I know that wasn't because of Jimmy, but that was God moving through both of us.
Yeah. It's a shift, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what you just nailed. You said, I have to see the presence of God. That was actually in that reading that David just read, when it said heaven is the term for the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
It's weird. It's like you get out of the way. It's like something happens through you, right? My grand sponsor, I'm probably going to botch this, but he talks about forgiving somebody being actually like a gift we've received, right? It's not us actually forgiven, but it's something we receive from above, right?
Right. Well, it's like the big book says, cheerfully capitalize on it as an opportunity to demonstrate his omnipotence.
Yeah.
That word demonstrate is used throughout Sermon on the Mount lots of times, always in a spiritual context.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go into more of some of this. Let's talk more about just some of the Sermon on the Mount stuff. Yeah, David, or either one of y'all, let's share on some of the Sermon on what.
So, Bill W. talked about how he got most of the 12 steps from Sam Shoemaker, and I'm not so sure about that. When I read Sermon on the Mount, I found a little trail from pages 25 to 29 in that book for anybody who might have it and want to look for themselves. I'm gonna skip around a little bit, but I found some of the soil that steps 1 through 3 grow in. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. This gnomic saying is actually the philosopher's stone of the alchemists that turn the base metal of limitation and trouble into the gold of comfort or true harmony. The true significance of the word meek in the Bible is a mental attitude for which there is no other single word available. Mm. And it is this mental attitude which is the secret of prosperity or success in prayer. It is a combination of open-mindedness, faith in God, and the realization that the will of God for us is always something joyous and interesting and vital, and much better than anything we could think of for ourselves. This state of mind also includes a perfect willingness to allow this will of God to come about in whatever way divine wisdom considers to be best, rather than in some particular way that we have chosen for ourselves. In step one, we inherit some meekness. Once we concede to the power that our illness had over us and our personal powerlessness, we need power from somewhere, right? And this year is telling me that power actually wants my well-being to improve.
Yeah.
That God is not trying to punish me, and that He's got better ideas than I do. When I have an internal attitude of meekness and not pridefulness, then what will naturally come to my mind and my spirit are better than what my mind would conceive otherwise. Mm. And, people talk about steps 2 and 3 in such a negative context in the room sometimes. They make God's will sound like it's a burden, like it's
a chore,
like it's God's will was my car to break down today. Well, yeah, maybe so, maybe not. Maybe God wants you to get a new car. Maybe God wants you to level up. God has always had better plans than I could conceive of. And, God's will isn't something that I have to fear today. Sometimes God's will is to see my daughter be born. Sometimes God's will is to get married. Sometimes God's will is to make some music with my bros. I've made music with you, Paul, and I've made music with you, Jimmy, but we have not all made music together.
Yeah.
We got to change that.
Yeah, I'm saying this in a public forum so that I'm putting it out there so that we can make our demonstration, But back to what I was saying, I don't know. This stuff puts an exciting spin on what could sound like a chore if we're missing that piece.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. My grand sponsor always says God's will is the best deal there is.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. And it's cool. Like, it goes into the second step, right? It's like, currently, my current sponsor, and when we went through the second step, he was like, if I, you get to choose your own conception of God, however inadequate it's enough to make the approach. So if we're not going to join, if we're going to turn our will and our life over to the care of God in this sense, or if we're going to decide to turn our will and our life over to God in the third step, like, we're not going to do that if he's just up there checking the box, keeping score on us. I've been doing a lot of dirty stuff for years, right? It's like, I'm not going to turn my will. He one time he said it was like entering a basketball game with Michael Jordan and giving him a 50-point lead. I ain't jumping on that court. So whenever it's funny because, like, what I think when I started getting into a lot of the Emmet stuff, my shift, I had these new conceptions of a loving God. It's like, wow, like his guys like talking about the Bible and some of this Bible quote stuff in ways where it was like, wow, it's a whole new experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
And other preachers have done the same thing. Not to get on out in left field, but Richard Rohr, I'm a big Richard Rohr fan. Richard does.
Oh yeah.
Richard's done a lot of cool stuff with it too. There's other preachers too that have done it. It's cool though. I mean, just having a new conception of a loving, all-powerful Father, right?
Yeah. When I first came into the rooms, honestly, the idea of your own conception of God was a turn off for me.
Yeah.
From the environment that I grew up in, no disrespect to any of them. I still go to church sometimes nowadays, and I have zero moral qualms with church.
Yeah.
As an institution at large, I might find little things here and there, but it was a turnoff for me in the beginning because I'm like, well, I'm supposed to believe this one set of things it looks like, and that's why I said earlier that I borrowed something. I borrowed somebody's conception of God, and I think it worked for as long as it was supposed to. I don't think God is too picky about what you call him, as long as you call him.
Yeah.
But I do think he also invites us to learn more. And so I think he allowed that discomfort to happen to me. I don't think he caused it. I don't think God, willed anything. I don't think God willed my discomfort, but I think he allowed it so that I would seek a deeper relationship with him.
Yeah.
And anybody can read a bunch of books. Anybody could memorize big book quotes, but that's very different from an actual spiritual experience.
Yeah.
The word experience, like as I'm in the program longer, that phrase spiritual experience, it gets bigger in my mind's eye. The letters get bolder. Maybe they're in neon now when originally they were just in regular print. And Emmet Fox's stuff really helped me to believe that it's okay to have that.
Yeah.
It's okay to trust my own experience. There are plenty of preachers who will say, well, don't trust your own experience. Well, like, did God give me all of these mental faculties for me to ignore all of them? Did God give me a nervous system for me to ignore it? My experience is all that I have. My experience is all that I have. And, I like the fact that I'm invited to have a richer, deeper experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool because some of the, like, it's weird how some of these writers, clearly something's working through them, because like I would just listen to certain stuff, because I'm a big audio book guy, and I would listen to certain stuff and like just a shift would take place right in the midst of it, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, that's powerful, right? There was like a level of freedom, like I shared earlier, I don't know how to say it, but it's like, I was experiencing something that just felt natural and I knew it was right. You know what I mean? Like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like something I'd been knowing for years, yet didn't even realize that I knew it, right? And it just felt natural.
It's like Mark Houston used to say, you have to wake up the part of you that already knows God.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Here's something that kind of sticks out to me with what we're talking about right now. And, I realized this saying, actually sometime last year, I believe me and my sponsor were talking about it. And I always thought it was kind of a diss when I'd hear an old timer say, your best thinking got you here.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, screw you, buddy.
Yeah.
But, what if that has a deeper meaning to it in context of what we're talking about with, the Sermon on the Mount and Emmet Fox, and God working through us through intelligence, our own thinking. Yeah. Maybe that was, the thought to go in that room and work through the steps and seek. That was the seed, that was really our best thinking that got us in that seat to get us to recover.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like cool because, like, man, I used to get so mad when people would say that, dude. Now it's like, man, I love it because it's like, it's true. It's not a diss.
Oh, you turned the connotation of that inside out. Whoa.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it's a blessing, right? I mean, it don't always look like it in the beginning, but like at the end of the day, this is where I've found God, or, this is what's got me to start seeking more and more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go into, I like something that you just made me think of was like, my best thinking, that's kind of shifted into like God's thinking or not, maybe not say God's thinking, but like, how, in Step 10, how it says each day is the day we must carry the vision of God's will in all our activities. Right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Like when I first got here, I didn't have any kind of conception on what I even thought that may mean. Right. And I started going through the steps and I started having, change of heart. Every time I go through the steps, I had a different experience. But probably about the fifth or sixth time I went through the steps, it was like, something inside of me internally shifted to where it was like, I just, like I always share with people, especially like, probably 5 years sober when I did a 4-step again. It was like, I don't really know what I think God wants me to do always, but I got a pretty good understanding on what I'm not supposed to be doing, right?
Yeah.
I start finding all these things in my character pretty objectionable, right? And as I start going through that process, now I got more of an understanding on what I think the carrying the vision of God's will and for all my activity is, right? And I really like how kind of what maybe inspired me to think that way was it's like my best thinking got me here. Well, what happens to the steps was I started having a change of heart where I started having this desire to seek and do God's will, right? And seek and seek and seek. I got a taste of the honey, for lack of a better term, right? And I realized nothing else was going to satisfy me like that, right? And then now that's, the working part of my everyday life is that. It's like, when, I have a desire to seek and do God's will, right? And, it's not necessarily my best thinking. My best thinking kind of gets me into, a crap situation, right? But, what God had me be in this situation. And I like how kind of carrying that vision through my daily practices, which was a game changer, right? How about y'all?
Well, definitely, man. For me, carrying out the vision of God's will oftentimes means not offering up resistance to obstacles that show up. I'm gonna do another pairing here of the Big Book and Sermon on the Mount. It's on page 84 in the Big Book, and it's on page 75 in Sermon on the Mount. And we have ceased fighting anything and anyone, including alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally. And we will find that this attitude has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. This doctrine of resist not evil is the great metaphysical secret. To the world, those who do not understand, it sounds like moral suicide, but the feeblest surrender to aggression. But in the light of the Jesus Christ revelation, it is seen to be superb spiritual strategy. Antagonize any situation and you give it power against yourself. Offer mental non-resistance and it crumbles away in front of you. I was chairing a meeting not too long ago, and I read from that passage in the Big Book, and all the old timers actually started arguing with this sentence, without any thought or effort on our part. And I had to, I was thinking, if you could just read page 75 in sermon, it explains it. It means if we're in a state where we're not making an enemy of our circumstances, then we're going to have a healthy attitude towards liquor.
Attitude,
yeah. Right. Yeah. And I couldn't quote Sermon on the Mount to him. And so that was a circumstance that I had the opportunity to antagonize, but I didn't, Yeah. It's like the snake that eats its own tail there. But yeah, like the attitude of mental non-resistance has been a huge one for carrying out the vision of God's will.
Nice.
Right. You said it's easier to tell what God's will is not, I had an experience, and this was kind of before I got into the Emmet Fox stuff. But when I was working for a grocery store, I was taking the money out of one of the self-checkout machines to bring to the cash office, and there was this family of customers, and they were letting their kids play the lottery machine, which is like super against the law, and for a second, I got on a moral hilltop. Suddenly, this person who is in recovery for alcoholism and nefarious substances cares about the law, But I pointed at him and I yelled across the way, "Hey, your kids can't do that!" And then this guy yells at me and says, "One thing you're not going to do is tell me what to do." And so in that moment, my first impulse was to go over there and start yelling at this guy's face. Wrong. My second impulse was to like quit my job on the spot. That was oftentimes my strategy when I was out there drinking. Also wrong. I was granted a third thought that said, you have important work to do right now. You should go do it. And I didn't engage. I didn't antagonize my circumstances there. And the manager of the store ended up handling that situation because it's his job to, it's not mine, you know. So I was able to fulfill my role. He was able to do his, and I was able to get over it. For the most part. I mean, I'm still imitating the guy. Maybe there's a resentment there. But
I got a good laugh.
But hey, as Bill sees it, says nothing in God's economy is wasted.
Yeah,
So
I love that.
take with that what you will.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. You know, I think that one of the what just showed up in my mind was, you know, I think the game changer with the Emmet teachings was I got to see how like I'm creating all this, right? You know, and that was a big game changer. You know, like I don't know. I meet a lot of people that come in, you know, early recovery. I sponsor a lot of guys, and that's usually an eye-opening experience that not everyone really can hear in a lot of different times. You know, not everyone's ready to hear that, right? Mm-hmm. And but for me, I guess I'd suffered so much. I was going through such mental torture, right, and to where it was just, you know, a sense of freedom, a sense of relief that I was getting just by realizing, like, wow, I'm doing this, right? I'm doing this. I keep doing this. Like, I keep beating myself up. I keep, you know, talking crap to myself. I'm manufacturing a storyline. Next thing you know, I'm buying it, right? I had one sponsor who used to tell me, I'm manufacturing on one side, buying it on the other. You know what I mean? You know, and so it was just a game changer whenever I started seeing that stuff, right? And then it drove me crazy because as I started seeing it, I realized I couldn't stop it, right? And I had to have, like, you know, tap into the power through the process. And yeah, how about y'all? Like, if you could say that there's like one of the major pivotal points after getting into some of his teachings, what do you think it would be?
There was actually two for me. Well, they kind of feed into each other. You kind of hit on it. I'm making this. I'm doing this. I'm creating this. You know, and that, you know, when taken the wrong way, you know, I know there was a point in my life, if somebody would have told me that, I would have been like, oh, well, my ego's gonna, you know, screw that up or whatever. But, you know, realizing, like, we go back to the soul aspect, that we're an expression of God, and that we do, as his children, have dominion over our lives. That is empowering and disturbing. Man, when I first got it, I went, when I first I had the aha moment, and it took me a minute. I'd been reading Emmet Fox for a year, and me and my sponsor were halfway through Sermon on the Mount when I had that aha moment. I said, you mean to tell me I can't shake my fist at bearded man in the sky and blame all my shit on him?
Yeah.
It's all in my creation. The blessings and curse is what I think and what I do and what I claim.
Yeah.
And that was terrifying to me. But now, you know, a couple of years into being familiar with that and actually putting that to practice, it is liberating. Still a little bit terrifying though sometimes.
Yeah.
You know, I like to forget it. I like to forget the power that we hold, you know. But I honestly think that saved my sobriety.
Yeah.
That discovery saved my sobriety.
Yeah.
Because my first 2 years sober, yes, I did have the relief, but I was still hurting.
Yeah.
You know, every other week I was taking a written inventory to my old sponsor, just because I was sober, but I was not handling it great, if that makes sense. You know, I was doing the steps, you know, I was there wasn't the connection with my higher power, because, like David, I was using somebody else's concept and not really making the connection. And once I got into the Emmet Fox, it's like, okay, it starts making sense. A lot of that fear starts going away. And now, and I'm not knocking putting pen to paper. I think that's very important.
Yeah.
Especially like when I forget, when I become, I'm going to sound so sacrilegious by saying this, but in the context, when I become that God with amnesia, when I forget who I am,
Yeah.
It's important for me to see what obstacle am I placing in my way? What is my part in that?
Yeah.
And what can I do to change my mentality and my actions that will, and what can I do to work with God in that, and not in the, punitive context, but, what can I do to remember and change my mindset?
Yeah.
And I've seen it work every time. Every time it works.
Yeah.
I have never not seen it work. And that goes with both good thinking and negative thinking. And, and it's, like I said, it's both beautiful and terrifying. And I wish I could talk about it more openly, in other settings,
Yeah.
But it's great to be talking about it in this setting.
Yeah.
Because, I'm going to sound like Marty McFly in Back to the Future. You're not ready for this, but your kids are going to love it. I feel like, society's coming along. I feel like society's starting to wake up. Like Emmet Fox talks about the race mind, and, the evolution of the race mind, becoming more and more accepting of these ideas. And I think we're getting closer as a society. But I think we're still, as a whole, not ready to hear these powerful truths. But we've come a long way in 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jimmy and I were kind of talking about that before you called, how society is kind of waking up to these ideas. And it's interesting how, the ways in which society is waking up to these ideas, that there's a lot of emphasis placed on manifestation and thoughts creating your reality. But oftentimes they're not talking about Jesus while doing it.
Right.
You got a different group of people talking about Jesus in the Bible, and you got people talking about manifestation and the power of positive thinking over here. And I would love to get them to. I would love to ask them all to read this stuff and then have a conversation with each other. I feel like we'd get along a lot better.
Yeah.
But something that. To answer the question that you asked a minute ago, Paul, there are a couple of things of his that I keep on tap all the time. Number one, in Sermon on the Mount, it says the golden rule of scientific Christianity is think of others how you would like them to think of you.
Wow.
I use that so much. I use that so often. It's an awesome cure for social anxiety too.
Nice.
I find that, when I'm not on a good spiritual footing, I tend to be a little bit more on the codependent side. And I'm trying not to claim I'm trying not to claim my codependency, but I'll say, I'm more on the socially anxious codependent side if I'm not on a firm spiritual footing. And if I see somebody walking by, that idea pops into my head and I think, oh, okay, well, that guy is a person of dignity. He probably just got off of work and he's doing his best to pay his rent and to be a good citizen of the world. And within 2 or 3 seconds, I'll turn around and say, hey, man, what's up? And I've never talked to this person in my life.
Yeah.
But, my internal dialogue shifts to a spiritually positive one, and all of a sudden, this dude is speaking to me as though I've been his friend for a long time.
Yeah.
Another big one from Sermon is whenever you have a disagreement with somebody, talk to the Christ in them.
Nice.
Or if you don't like that language, use Big Book language. Talk to the fundamental idea of God in them.
Yeah.
Right? Because, the Big Book says it's in every man, woman, and child, and I'm inclined to think that that is correct.
Yeah.
Because, if I'm having a disagreement with somebody, it doesn't really matter who it is, and I'm talking to the Christ in them. Jimmy's holding something in my face, and I'm losing my train of thought here. If I do that, then all of a sudden it's not about whatever I was thinking of. It's not about whatever they were thinking of. It's all of a sudden both of us are in pursuit of truth and reconciliation and a path forward. That's been a huge thing for me. It's it's amazing how little things like that, little 1 or 2 sentence ideas can totally revolutionize the way that we deal with other people.
Yeah.
Because, we're all just people, but no person is just a person. We're all expressions of the divine in some way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's funny because Katie, I'm sure you heard that when Katie was going through the KDP did step 10 a week ago, and she talks about in her 10th step, turning it into a positive affirmation, which is exactly what you're talking about pretty much, and that's cool. That's good stuff. I got so much stuff going on in my head. I'm trying to figure, it's just freedom, I think the common theme over today's conversations, I always have like throughout the week, it'll be different things that pop up. Today's has been freedom. My sponsor sent me and my sponsor were having a conversation over text earlier, and I'd mentioned the word freedom, and he'd suggested for me to check out a body of work that an author had wrote on interior freedom, and I'm about to start a new book called Interior Freedom, and yeah, man, it's just freedom in it, right? Just starting to see the truth about yourself, and also I like the game changer was when Emmet started going through the Beatitudes, man. That revolutionized the whole thing, right? He starts talking about, just freedom from self. You start seeing how, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. I think we touched on that a second ago without actually saying it. But, realizing that, like, you're not going to wholeheartedly seek a relationship with that power until you exhaust all your stuff, right? Until you exhaust all your ideas and mourn, right? There's a lot of freedom in that, right? It's what it does is it starts seeing that how, like, maybe these situations that I'm going through in life have some kind of purpose, right? Like maybe it's just a part of the bigger scheme of things for me waking up to the truth, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think ultimately, and Emmet doesn't say this directly, but his work, like, it says it without saying it. There's a common misconception when people read the Bible about the word repent. So when somebody says the word repent to you, you probably imagine like an angry preacher, maybe he's got a southern accent, maybe he's waving the Bible around and he's wiping the sweat off of his forehead with some kind of a towel, and
oh man,
the fact that you're laughing, there's identification there.
Yeah.
But that word in Greek, in the Greek New Testament, that word is metanoia. And metanoia does not mean to, like, beat yourself up about your sinful ways. It means to change your mind. And not just to, like, change your opinion, but it means to change the fundamental nature of your mind. To change the way that your mind works entirely. And I mean, the big book is talking about that too. With a vital spiritual experience. I'm going to once again read something from the big book and then read something from sermon that kind of illustrates that. It's on page 27 in the big book, and it's on page 40 in Sermon on the Mount. Let's see. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. In fact, I have been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangement within you. If you should get a very strong realization of the presence of God within you, it would make a very great and dramatic change in your character, so that in the twinkling of an eye, your outlook, your habits, your whole life, in fact, would completely change in every respect. Many such cases are on record, both in the East and in the West. The genuine cases of what used to be called conversion being instances in point. Because the change caused by prayer is a radical one, Jesus refers to it as being born again. since it makes you into a different man. It is actually as though you had been born anew. And I noticed you use the phrase game changer a lot, Paul. I mean, that's game changer is just a modern way of expressing that very same thing.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. It's funny because, like, if looking back over the experience, that's exactly what it is. You know, just a whole new set of concepts, ideas, you know, come in and start, you know, just changing things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jimmy, talk to us, man. What's coming to mind?
Yeah, so that kind of goes into another, like, I know we're talking about sermon, but we talk about, you know, the whole new set of ideas. And, you know, Emmett Fox wrote a lot of good books. And, you know, David's got a whole lot in front of him right now other than just Sermon on the Mount. And I've got my daily reader, and then I've got Power Through Constructive Thinking. And then Power Through Constructive Thinking, actually in both books, it talks about what Emmet Fox calls the mental diet. You know, and, you know, that's also a game changer. And it kind of hits on what he talked about there is, you know, changing that way of thinking. You know, we have certain ideas and they change. And then going on that mental diet, you become more aware of, you know, where your thoughts go. And, man, when I took that mental diet, and I will tell you this, I've never successfully made it 7 days.
Yeah.
It's called the 7-day mental diet. I've never successfully made it the full 7 days.
Talk to us about what that is real quick.
What'd you say?
Talk to us a little bit about what the 7-day mental diet is.
So the 7-day mental diet is, let me just give you an overview of it. It's I don't want to say challenge, and I'm trying to find a better summary of it because I have the long chapter in the book. It is basically where you dedicate a period of time to only see positive thoughts or the presence of God and not dwell on anything negative. So that doesn't mean that, I'm going to beat myself up when I have a negative thought that pops up. But for, 7 days, you set the goal to see the presence of God. Negative thought pops in, immediately golden key it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've tried that, and I usually last about a day. About a day. But it really makes you think. You do have a choice in that thinking, and we do attach a lot of the the old thinking, the negative thinking, the limited thinking, the fear, resentments, and all the stuff that the big book tells us is bad for us. It kind of ties into that. Yeah. And what I like, if you read deeper into the 7-day mental diet, because, if you read that at the surface level and you miss certain sentences, you'll be like, oh man, this dude just expects me to think positive for 7 days straight.
Yeah.
And that's the goal, to think positive and healthy. But, my failings in the past, because I haven't tried this in a while, maybe I should try it soon and see how far I've grown. But my failings in the past have always arisen when I start beating myself up for that negative thinking. And what does that cause? More negative thinking.
Yeah.
It's a downward spiral. Just like in the big book where it says resentment is the number one offender. Fear is a corrosive thread. We start giving into that and feeding and fighting more, and resisting, and we just create more negative things. And what the 7-day mental diet says is to golden key it. That thought pops up. Think about God instead. Think about an aspect of God instead. See the presence of God.
Yeah.
Where your trouble seems to be.
Yeah.
And, it's made me a lot more aware of where my mind goes if I'm not disciplined.
Yeah. Well, it's also like I love how it makes me think of the nightly review, right? How and not just the nightly review, but all the way, like, one of my favorite parts about, I say this all the time, but one of my favorite parts about Bill's writing in the big book is that whenever he's about to give you like a chunk of truth to digest about yourself that may not be very pleasant, he always directs your attention back to, like, hey, look, don't beat yourself up because, diminish our usefulness to others. Like, what's our purpose here? What's our purpose? What's our purpose? Right? And I love how, like, he always does that, which is the same thing, right? If my it's like, oh, okay, I'm not going to beat myself up anymore because it would diminish my usefulness to others. Let's bring our attention back to the focus, the real focus of what we're doing this for, through the power of God helping his children, right? And it's the same kind of concept, and I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just so much good stuff like that is, I'm glad that we're doing what we're doing, and I have faith that it's going to reach the people that need to hear it, because this is powerful stuff. Like even for people not in recovery, think about how many human beings go through life with the mental health issues that we have. Depression, overworking, low self-esteem. You don't have to be an alcoholic or an addict to have low self-esteem. We're plagued with it, as a race.
Yeah.
And if we knew these truths on, we are one with God, we are God's children, and we're good, we're inherently good and powerful. And, our thinking and actions, hold power to them, whether you're negative or positive, I think a lot of wars would probably be prevented, once we move as a race to that line of thinking and we actually practice it and move more towards, the God mind as opposed to the race mind.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
This is make good
Save
stuff,
the
y'all.
world. What time you got?
Yeah.
9:16 p.m.
I saved the world.
Jimmy D saved the world, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff, man. It's been a cool conversation. I like the dynamics and just the format of us just, connecting and sharing experience. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, what we should do is we should just we should keep it going. Maybe find some other stuff. Even if we did some step discussions and kind of go through our personal experience through some of the step stuff at a later date. I'm sure a lot of people would hear. I like the dynamics of three people. It's a lot easier to kind of feed off each other, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, cool. What's y'all's thoughts? You got anything else you want to share on any of this?
I would like to read one more thing.
Okay.
One more pairing, because I think we should really, since Jimmy saved the world, this is what we have to look forward to. So I'm going to pair something in the big book that I'm sure we've all heard 100 times with something in Sermon on the Mount that we may not have. But if we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity, and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. The world will turn out to be full of charming people, only too anxious to help you in every way. Others will come into your life only for good. You will find yourself occupied with the most delightful and interesting activities of the most widely useful kind. All your energy and all your faculties will find full scope for their expression. And in short, you will develop the completely integrated and fully expressed personality of which modern psychology dreams. Those who have not glimpsed the secret of the Christ message may look upon all this as nothing but a beautiful vision, too good to be true. But it is just the essence of the Christ message that nothing is too good to be true, because the love and power of God are true. It is just this very belief that complete harmony is too good to be true that really prevents our getting it. We as mental beings make the laws under which we live, and we have to live under the laws we make. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them.
Nice. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's good stuff. It's funny.
Well, if I see the world with that, You just tucked it in and gave it a good night.
Yeah.
Fuck her up, baby.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Cool, guys. I really appreciate this, man. It's been cool. It's funny because it's inspired me to get back into some Emmet. I hadn't listened. I haven't checked out yet. After when we started discussing some of these topics, I did get into a little bit of it. But it's funny just to let the listeners know. Go out and have your own experience with it. Go out and buy some literature. You'll either be able to hear it or you won't. And because we're just touching the surface, like clearly, as you can see, when they're reading some of the literature that he's wrote, like us saying that, we're creating our own reality or whatever, it's just barely touching the surface to like the actual listening or reading how deep he goes with this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, well, appreciate it, guys. And y'all stay online. I'm gonna y'all stay online, and we'll talk about some other stuff after this. And for the listeners, we have this week. Our next episode is this Sunday, June 22nd. It's at Juanita U from Santa Fe, New Mexico. We're going to go back. We're doing traditions 3 and 4. We're doing Juanita is a past delegate, Al-Anon member, and just an awesome lady. Put all the past delegate stuff aside. She's just an awesome lady. Real good. She's married to a real good buddy of mine for a long time, and I learned so much just through our conversations with her. But we're doing a series on applying the 12 traditions to our family lives, the principles behind the traditions to our family lives. So get on there and check that out. We'll be meeting up on this upcoming Sunday. So appreciate it, guys. And anything y'all want to close with?
Just thanks for having us on, Paul. It's been fun.
I look forward to the next time, brother.
I do want to say it's really cool that, back in the day, there would have maybe been grinders and illicit substances and bags and bottles on the table. But I'm sitting across from Jimmy here, and we've got 7 books on the table and a notebook and a soda and a Kool-Aid. I had a blast.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool, dude. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, man.
Thanks, Paul.
Have a good night.
You too.
Hello. Thank you for listening to 3 Legacies Recovery Recordings. If you enjoy our program, please be sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share with a friend. We're also self-supporting, so feel free to contribute to the channel through Venmo at Recovery Recordings 615. Please note that the views expressed on this podcast are solely our individual views and do not represent any official stance of any 12-step program. We are not affiliated with any specific recovery organization, and this content should not be considered as professional advice for alcoholism or addiction.